Welcome to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. This is public access television for Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our guest today is Barry Cooney, Editor-in-Chief of Man Alive, New Mexico's Journal of Men's Wellness. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas, and this is public access television for Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our guest today is Barry Cooney, and Barry's a native of New York who's lived in New Mexico for the last 12 years. He's been active in the men's movement for a better part of 7 plus. He does workshops around the country and is editor of Man Alive magazine, which is the men's magazine here in New Mexico, or a journal. Let me be a little more clear. It's a journal of men's wellness for the land of enchantment. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you.
Good. How are you doing?
Very good, Mike.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Hey, you want to tell us about Man Alive? Give us some basic background, a little bit of an update on its origins and where you guys are coming from, where you'd like to go.
Well, Man Alive was actually the idea of a gentleman named Chuck Cockle-Reese. Chuck now lives in Oregon, but back in 1987 he was a regular attendee at our annual men's wellness conferences in Abiquiu at Ghost Ranch. And one day while driving home following one of these conferences, he said, you know what we need is a journal or some kind of newspaper about men's wellness to keep the ideas that we've generated at this conference alive. And so in March of '88, Man Alive was born, and we've been going strong ever since.
What kind of circulation do you have?
Well, actually, we print about 1,500, which sounds like a small number, but in reality, these issues are Xeroxed and sent to men's councils all over the United States and Canada, and even a few to Europe as well.
I see. And you're quarterly?
We're quarterly, so we publish 4 issues annually.
4 issues annually. What kind of articles and features do you carry, or what kind of message? I know you have a letters section that I read occasionally. Give us a general idea what kind of stories and features you might have in there.
Well, what we're attempting to do is to really put together a kind of publication that's going to really express what are on men's minds. And we're looking for a wide range of topics, and we usually get things having to do with parenting, having to do with men's relation to their children, having to do with fathers, poetry, different kinds of views about the way men feel and the kinds of problems that they have as being men.
So there's not a typical message that you could point to. It's generally the things that men are interested in all over America.
Well, I think that that's true. If we look at different journals across the country, we see that there is some regionalism involved. Different parts of the country do reflect different kinds of thinking. And for us here in Man Alive, what we've discovered is as our men's movement in the state grows and gets more widely known, the issues change. So initially some of the issues might have to do with lots of things that have to do with men's healing, the things they need to work on to heal themselves.
What would be some typical wounds that men might have?
Oh goodness, a biggie always is men's relationship to their fathers. It seems that that's the one issue in which many men feel a lot of pain. Fathers are either emotionally absent or physically absent. They're abusive, so that is a very, very big topic with men and the wounds that they bear. Many times we've discovered that once we deal with that issue, or once we introduce that issue to other men, that is the beginning point from which a lot of healing takes place for men.
Right. I had heard people say a couple of times that the wounds you receive is what gives you the gift. In dealing with that wound, out of that comes the gift that you have to give to the world and to other men. You guys put together a little book of anthology on men's poetry, didn't you? And worked on that for about a year. Would you talk about that a little bit here?
Sure. We have, as you probably know from other shows, a very, very strong and well-developed men's movement here in New Mexico.
Statewide, of course.
Oh, statewide.
Sure.
Primarily, I think, in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, but certainly various parts of the state. And what we discovered is that there are a lot of very, very good writers and poets amongst this core of men that do men's work. So two people, one man whose name I just mentioned a while ago, Chuck Cocklereese, and David Johnson, who is a poet and English prof at UNM, got together and edited various submissions of poetry. And the result is a poetry, an anthology of men's poetry called Talking from the Heart. And so we have about 15 or 16 men that contributed to this, and I think we had submissions, hundreds of poems. So out of this we screened the very best, and last year we came out with this anthology.
Great. My interest in Robert Bly originally started in the poetry that he was doing, and poetry for me is probably one of the big parts of men's wellness. I think there's some things in there that touch on the heart, as the title of the book implies, and kinds of takes us out of the mind up here. I have a real tendency to stay in my head a whole bunch and not get down into my heart and soul quite as much. And poetry is something that I can do to touch on that. Maybe a little later in the program we can take a look at a few of those poems and try to let some of the viewers hear what you guys have to offer. That book's, of course, available, and at the end of the program we'll let people know how to contact you so they could get some copies if they would, right, if they would like to have it. Well, let's see. You know, I've noticed that a lot of bookstores here in New Mexico are beginning to carry men's literature. I mean, not just poetry, but various things that deal with recovery, etc. But that's kind of a new thing. There's just a lot of stuff on feminist writings and women's. I mean, they're just, there's stores dedicated to it. Do you feel that men's issue oriented literature is kind of a new thing developing? We'll see a lot more of it, or what do you think about that?
It's very new, and it's very exciting. In fact, Bly's book, Iron John, was on the New York Times bestseller list for weeks and weeks. I think it's still there. And of course, Sam Keene's book, Fire in the Belly, has just come out, and I believe that also made the New York Times bestseller list. And what we're seeing here is an outpouring of men's writings about men, by men, and it's going to get very, very big in the next few years. There's going to be a lot of work out for men to look at.
So you think this men's movement stuff is going to go down the road 20, 30 years? You think? I mean, I guess what I'm saying to you is a lot of people try to look at this like it's a fad, turn it into a caricature, and just and feel like it's just kind of the latest crest in New Ageism or something. And I personally feel that a lot of the men I know are very committed to the movement and getting some sort of a sense of wholeness and wellness and beginning a lifestyle that's good for them. So so what you're telling me is you think this is here to stay.
Well,
and it's something that men are going to develop for a long time, not just the next 5 years as a trend.
I can only say that in the 7 or 8 years that I personally have been involved in men's activities in New Mexico, I've seen dozens and dozens of men whose lives have completely changed. They seem to me to be very vital now, very full of energy, clear, focused in their roles as fathers and in their roles in relation to women and on the job scene. And so I certainly don't think that this is a passing trend at all.
There's so much to deal with. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick pause and look at our Parent Craft tip for the week, and we'll be right back with you.
After an episode of misbehavior, take time to talk with your child. Show as much understanding as you can. Make it clear that the behavior was wrong, but the child is still loved and valued. For instance, you might say something like, "It's not okay for you to draw on the walls. Drawing is something we do on paper only, and you make beautiful drawings. Let's go do some now."
Welcome back to the show. This is Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. Our guest today is Barry Cooney, Editor-in-Chief of Man Alive. And Man Alive is our journal of men's wellness for the land of enchantment. Barry, there are a tremendous number of books out. You know, there's Wingspan. The Austin Men's Center has one they do called just Man Magazine.
Right.
You were saying some things that are interesting to me as we were trying to prepare this little dialogue today, and one of them is that you think there are a number of regional aspects and differences that make Man Alive itself sort of unique to this area culturally. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Well, there's a lot that could be said about that, but I think the essential point is that here in New Mexico, we've spawned a grassroots movement that basically has drawn its leadership internally. And so we haven't looked outside for others to tell us who we're about or what we're about. And the result of that is that there's a core group of men that have become pretty sophisticated over the last half dozen years in terms of working shoulder to shoulder with one another on issues of what it's like to be a man and some of the issues that men confront. As a result of that, these kinds of things are reflected in some of the writings that come out in our journal. And so we find that we're moving in a way from, how should I put it, we're moving from a healing perspective slowly into a perspective that involves more issues concerning social consciousness. As men fully grasp their own sense of self-empowerment, they look around and say, okay, I'm healing now. Now what can I do for the planet? What can I do for others? So it's a less egocentric position, and I think that's reflected in some of the recent articles that we've been doing and that we receive.
You bet. You know, I love New Mexico and the Southwest because of the cultural mix we have out here. And it seems that we have one of the best working cultural mixes in America. I think that all of our cultures borrow from one another and empower one another and share. I found it's good for me because it's a way of keeping honest, you know, and of being able to have other cultures to bounce my own off of, and therefore give me the feedback to be able to make an assessment on where I'm straight up and where I'm kind of crooked, you know. So
I'd like to say something about that, actually. I think one of the big failures, I wouldn't call it a failure yet, but something that we really need to work on in the men's movement here in New Mexico is the involvement of more minority representatives, notably of Hispanics, Native Americans, and blacks. I think that when you look at this phenomenon of men's wellness across the country, New Mexico is not that different from other places in that it is primarily a white middle-class phenomenon. And I think that...
Wait a minute. New Mexico is a white middle-class phenomenon?
That's right.
Or the men's movement is a white middle-class?
Both. When we look at representation nationally, we see primarily white middle-class men involved. And here in New Mexico, with many cultures, notably Anglo, Hispanic, and Native American being the three key ones, as you know, we still see white middle-class men predominantly represented in this movement. And that's what we're trying to attack head-on in both our newspaper and the kinds of people we're trying to reach out to, and also in our conferences and so on. So I think it is an issue, and it is an important factor that has to be considered.
You know, we talked about Spike Lee's movie and Jungle Fever and the other films he's made, and we also talked about Boys in the Hood, which were tremendous. We said this in another program, but I'll repeat myself since this is what we're talking about, which both of those were tremendous studies in black men trying to make stands and father and mentor in the face of disintegration of the culture around them. You know, literally the sounds of Uzi fire and automatic weapon fire in the streets while people were trying to do homework and study. I don't know, I think you're absolutely right. You know, I went to the Bly workshop, and most of us were white people there. I mean, there were a handful of Hispanics, and I don't remember one black person. And one of the things that Bly actually said was, we have to get more black people and more Hispanics involved in the men's movement. You know, actively involved in mentorship, in the role of initiation, and in being able to communicate with other men to deal with problems, because we all affect each other tremendously. I guess the point I was trying to make is I know a lot of people are doing sweat lodges that are parts of, and actually take Indian ceremonials to task. And these are things that the Indian culture gives us directly. I guess there's a historian named Toynbee that makes a statement, you know, that the Romans conquered the Greeks, but within a generation the Romans were Greek, because the Greek culture was so powerful. We out here have three very powerful cultures, and I think that the proximity to one another brings about a change in us. And I think it's time to begin to share some of that stuff and get some sort of a dialogue going. I know Bly was doing a lot of the poetry of Etheridge Knight, who's just a tremendous guy. Talking about initiation and mentoring, would you have a little poem on initiation that you might read from the anthology? Would you do that for us?
Sure.
Just as a next step, unless you
Sure.
had something you wanted to say.
No, at this point I'll say it through poetry.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
The nice thing about reading poems from this anthology, which is called Talking from the Heart, is that they're written by my friends. Here's one about a rites of passage, which is called Rites of Passage, by a gentleman named Robert Francis Johnson, who's a therapist in Santa Fe. 13 years old, Coney Island in the wintertime. The guys all watching as the tattoo man worked on my arm. Does it hurt? No way, a piece of cake, man. Inside, scared and hurt. I wonder what would happen if tears would begin to fall.
Thanks a bunch. That's a good poem. We have a short tape, and we'll be right back with you.
Whoever thought this would happen? Whoever thought a teacher from West Virginia would be teaching a class in Budapest? Good morning. But here I am, part of the first Peace Corps team in Eastern Europe. We're here to help Hungarian teachers learn how to teach English. It's an amazing time to be here. For these people, English is the language of opportunity, and they can't get enough of it.
How are you doing today?
Great. But language isn't the only thing we share. I'm learning Hungarians are a lot like we are. They love their freedom, and they're open to new ideas.
Two words of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
We all have a lot of work ahead of us, but I can't think of any job I'd rather have.
Be part of the future with the Peace Corps, the toughest job you'll ever love.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. This is Public Access Television. We're speaking with Barry Cooney, editor of Man Alive magazine. Barry, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you and submit some features and stories, what would they have? What would you be looking for, and how would they do that?
Well, what we're looking for is a broad range of poetry, of articles, of even coverage or reportage of men's events in the region. And I think what we're really looking for is guys willing to express themselves about issues that are important to them. And that can cover a lot of different topics. I think the best way to do it is just to, am I permitted to give out a phone number?
Yeah, we'll probably run that at the end of the program.
Okay,
first.
well, a way to do it would be to get some more information. That would be to call 828-1117. And I would be able to provide some information about our journal and what you have to do to submit pieces to that journal.
I see. If somebody wanted to pick up a copy of Man Alive here in the city, where could they go to look for one?
Well, we're now trying to place them in various bookstores. We have most of our readership through subscription, and so we charge a nominal subscription, and I can also give you information from that same number. But increasingly, we're trying to place Man Alive in area bookstores all over the city and also throughout Santa Fe as well.
I see. I see. We're talking about a couple of the kind of generative issues that this region is trying to do: mentorship, initiation, effective parenting. We were looking at talking about being aware of healing the planet, a little bit of social ecology, and the main thing is beginning a dialogue to deal with a lot of these shadow issues that exist for culturally, between peoples culturally, between the sexes, between men and other men, and the idea of sharing, which are tremendous. Just there's a lot of hope in that kind of a message. It means that you have people willing to talk. If you had just one or two things to say to men here, you know, as we get toward the end of the program, if you could lend any advice to someone who might want to begin a journey, what would you say?
I think the thing that first comes to mind, Mike, is that men needn't feel isolated. I think one of the primary characteristics that I discover about working with men is they carry around with them feelings that all the responsibility for the world is on their shoulders. Years ago at one of the conferences, I liked to say, you have to do it yourself, but you can't do it alone. And I think within the context of that statement is my notion that through various activities that are going on right now for men needn't feel isolated. They needn't carry around with them hidden secrets. They needn't withhold their emotions. And I think that probably is the biggest message that needs to be conveyed to men who are looking at this whole men's movement thing and saying, what is it all about, and feeling anxiety or fear or even repulsion. That they needn't feel isolated, and that there are men out there that are doing incredible work in not only healing themselves and dealing with issues that were deep, dark secrets, but also moving beyond that and just becoming strong and empowered in very new ways in terms of masculinity.
You know, for a group of people that started out as hunters thousands and thousands of years ago, the fact that we become so isolated is kind of amazing. You know, the idea of being able to get your needs met with other men rather than, one of the problems that men have a lot of times now in modern times is thinking that the woman that they're involved with is supposed to get all their needs met for them. You know, which causes a lot of the problems, and learning to get some centeredness in here and realize that the transformation is happening in here. What would a guy do? Just go out and look for a man's group? Would he give you guys a call? I mean, how would you begin to find some interaction?
Well, there are many ways. One, if you're in Santa Fe, there is now a Santa Fe Men's Center, and all this information can be obtained by calling that number that I gave. I have my handle on most of the information, and what I don't know I can find out.
Sure.
And from that point on, we can get in touch with people who have access to men's support groups, who know something about some of the activities, workshops and whatnot that are going on for men. And everyone has to choose their own direction and what they want to do in this men's activities, men's movement business. Mm-hmm. It's a good way to start. And by feeling comfortable, then you can decide how, to what degree you want to get involved and what you want to do.
Right. That's great stuff. I'm always interested in getting together and drum. I know drumming is a big deal for me. It's one of those things very hard to explain to others. You know, as we approach things, it's real hard to. What do you guys do? Well, we go drum. Well, you know, and how do you explain to somebody what it's like to have, you know, 80 or I remember at Bly's workshop up there must have been at least 80 guys with drums. And then all these other guys dancing and jumping and turning and spinning. And the release in that was phenomenal. And to share it with other men was a great, great thing to do. I recommend that heartily. But there are also groups meeting in homes. I mean, we have everything from workshops like Bly was doing down to just groups of 4 or 5 of us getting together and trying to work out issues and share and be intimate in home settings. I mean, it's not a pay-for situation at all.
No.
It's, you know, most of this is absolutely free to anybody that wants to reach out and get it. We've talked about just about the whole gamut of basically in the publishing end of the men's movement. Anything that you think we might have overlooked, or?
Well, I think that you know, it takes a lot of probing and curiosity to find out what this men's movement business is all about. What I'm discovering is that there's a lot of misconceptions out there in the community at large about what this business is of men meeting together. And I think that there is it's an absolute necessity for men to take the time to find out what is happening, because what is happening is literally a change of consciousness. And it's that change of consciousness that has not only social but political connotations as well. And so it's publications like Man Alive and like Man out of Austin and so on that help put forth these ideas. But the real work is done when everyone takes their own needs, if they will, and tries to meet their own needs, and then discovers that their needs are really a mirror of the needs of all men.
You bet. I'd like to thank Barry Cooney for joining us today on Speaking of Men. Keep an eye out for Man Alive magazine. Check the credits at the end of this program. I'd like to remind all you guys, be sure and stand if you can, run if you have to, but whatever you do, don't quit.